Well, how about a look at the startup bill? You've heard that before. About 4 months ago, the Nigeria startup bill was presented at the National Assembly. The Senate finally passed the bill during the week. It seeks to position the country's startup ecosystem as the leading digital technology center in Africa. Let's have a conversation around that this morning with Emmanuel Paul, who is Managing Editor at TechPoint. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
As well as Tracy Okoro, who is State Adoption and Integration Lead. Thank you so much for your time. She joins us from Abuja.
Good morning, and thank you.
Well, I'm sure we've kept you waiting for a bit, but then you had to wait for that bill to be passed. So maybe it's just part of the process. So apologies about that. But how enthusiastic should Nigerians be about this? Let me start with you, Tracy.
I think that we should be really excited as a country. It's a signal that we are thinking of the future and we are investing in the future, and not just speaking about it, but there are collective actions have been sort of unleashed, and the full regalia has also been put together just to make sure that the tech-enabled ecosystem or the economy is fully supported to sort of reap the potentials of the future.
Okay. So it's one thing for us to talk about it, another thing to position or take action to expedite it. Do you see that action, the foundation for that action laid already, or is it something we have to work on?
Well, the full process has been an amazing and interesting one, in that it's not the usual process of following bills and having to run helter-skelter. There's been like a collective effort, so we call it like a big tent initiative. So which means that all stakeholders have come together to make sure that this works. And I make bold to say that this bill is probably one of the fastest bills that has gone through from start to finish to be able to get to this point. And so I think that the work has been done, right? The major work has been done, the foundation has been laid, and we look forward to going on with the same steam that we started up till implementation, because implementation is key, engagement is key, collaboration is key at this point.
Well, Mr. Paul, are you as enthusiastic as Tracy is?
Okay, yeah. I'm a little bit enthusiastic about the startup bill.
A little bit?
A little bit, but it's with a healthy dose of skepticism. And I think...
I don't know what dose of skepticism is healthy.
Healthy enough to be excited about the possibilities that could come from having a startup bill, right? It's meant to drive innovation. It's meant to drive growth in Africa's or Nigeria's startup space, rather. But there are some things that stick out to me, right? So if you go to the Nigerian Startup Bill website and you see all the partners from the government that are involved with the production of the startup bill, you will see the Office of the President, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the National Information Technology Development Agency, as NIDA. But there's a notable absence in that list, and that is the Central Bank of Nigeria. How does the Central Bank of Nigeria fit into this startup bill? Because a majority of the issues we've had with regulations and policies, significant number of them have come from the CBN, directed at fintech startups or digital currency startups or crypto startups, or startups playing in the FX space. Then another question is, how does the startup bill coexist with the NIDA Code of Practice, or the NIDA bill, which shook the tech ecosystem just a few months ago? So there's the NIDA bill, which had some very, very, very weird provisions.
Such as?
Okay. Fees, fines, levies, in case you fail to meet some Okay, so there's a 1% fee to be able to contribute to the NIDA Development Fund. Every company is supposed to contribute to that fund. Let's say, and initially we had just telcos and banks and all of that, but with the updated NIDA bill, you're seeing provisions like e-commerce companies, internet-based companies, which are all referring to startup. Then there's the NIDA Code of Practice, which seeks to regulate social media and how Nigerians operate on the internet. So the question I have is, how does the startup bill coexist with NIDA? And the Secretariat for the Startup, the Council, which is the startup bill is supposed to produce, the Council for Innovation, the Secretariat will be at the NIDA headquarters. So that is where my concern is. But ideally, the startup bill is a very, very, very awesome and innovative process. And I would really commend all the stakeholders that have brought this to pass, right? It shows a step in the right direction, but there are existing laws that have not been addressed. There are laws like the Pioneer Incentive, which is supposed to give pioneer startups to early stage businesses. What has been happening with that? Have we implemented that? Has any startup benefited from the Pioneer Incentive? There's a VC, there's a law that supports VC. I'm just trying to remember the name. It was enacted in 2004. Which is supposed to improve investment activities in Nigeria. So what has been happening with that? How about data protection? These companies are using technology. They're definitely going to be harvesting a lot of data from users. Do we have a clear and defined data protection law? So the startup bill in itself is a nice step in the right direction, but it's only the beginning. The other issues that I just mentioned, the other laws that are supposed to be supporting businesses need to be implemented. Then the occasional weird policy that seems to regulate how we use the internet, they need to be addressed. So that is where my skepticism is coming from.
Emmanuel, I'm trying to wrap my head around what you said about the CBN.
Yes.
Okay, when you mentioned cryptocurrency, I understand that. Because startups are not going to get money from the CBN. They're going to get money from the commercial banks. You didn't mention those at all. The CBN is the regulator. So they're regulating how the banks deal with you. They're not regulating you per se, are they?
So CBN actually regulates fintech startups. So the likes of Flutterwave, Paystack, they actually have to answer to the CBN. They need to get a payments license. Then we have a huge juggernaut like InterSwitch, who has been running for quite a while. They have a payment switch license. We have eTransact, a company that is listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Those are companies that actually receive the regulations of the CBN. So when you hear fintech startups, it's not just the big banks. Oh, sorry, when you hear the CBN regulations, it's not just the big banks, but smaller companies. There's PiggyVest, the darling of several Gen Zs and millennials currently. They have a microfinance, they have to work with a microfinance bank to get a microfinance bank license if they need to. And there's Kuda Bank, the bank of the free. They have a microfinance bank license.
They're all regulated by the CBN?
All regulated by the CBN.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, yeah, but I'm sure Tracy would want to speak to some of those issues as well. Being a founder of the Business Academy Africa and the State Adoption and Integration lead for the Nigeria Startup Bill. Those concerns most certainly... Oh, you're smiling already. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have the answers. Go ahead.
I'm excited because I think we've had this conversation with Emmanuel before, but maybe we didn't exhaust all the questions that he, because I think he did reach out to find out a few of these things. So first and foremost, there is we have a massive amount of companies that are supporting this whole journey, and we can't have all of them on the website. And this journey began with a lot of consultations and, a lot of meetings, focus group meetings, stakeholder relations, regional, conversations, town hall meetings. And for one of those things, we had a lot of MDAs in the room, of which CBN, DBN, a lot of these, financial regulators were in the room and had a conversation. So just because we don't have these companies, smack dab on the website, does not mean that they're not involved and they're not being carried along. I like to always remind people this, that every time, startups say, oh, we have an innovation and it's very disruptive, right? There are displacements. So for the government, they have a huge burden to handle that displacement. So for example, let's say payment system, fintechs. When fintechs come up, they make it easy for you and I to be able to make financial transactions. But we forget that that means loss of jobs for some people, right? That means that a lot of things will no longer be working the old way. So the federal government has to be able to shoulder this. And this is why the Nigerian Startup Bill is taking the big tent approach. This big tent approach means that everybody is carried along, right? Just to make sure that you know what is going on and how it is going on, and everybody is involved in the process. Now, Emmanuel mentioned, NIDA, code of content, content creation, content moderation, and the rest. Now, there are conversations currently going on. NIDA is having stakeholder conversations with different people, but because, they're not going and, founders are not necessarily very interested in, and I'm sorry to say this, to go to the nitty-gritty, right, of these conversations, of even coming to meet the government halfway to say, all right, what is going on? How are things happening? How can we help? And explain these processes, right? So there's always some sort of a lacuna of information, and then, sometimes we jump into these conclusions. But there are currently stakeholder conversations going on that, content moderation conversation. And NIDA being the housing the council doesn't necessarily mean that, NIDA holds all the supreme power. It just means that as an agency that would be supervising these things, it would overlook. And there are different members, different people who form up that council, which even civil society organizations are represented. So which means that the interest of the tech ecosystem, and this is not just founders, these are the investors, these are the agencies, these are the regulators, these are even the consumers and the users. Their interests will all be considered and covered. And so I understand the healthy, skepticism that Emmanuel is talking about. And it's very important. It's very important because it will help to keep us on our toes, just to make sure that we are looking out for everybody that is involved in this process.
Well, another question that comes readily to mind then would be what the objectives are. It would seem like, well, from what both of you have said, the startup bill seems to be talking predominantly about the digital economy. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. The ultimate objective of the bill is to help foster a healthy environment for tech-enabled startups. So basically for the tech-enabled ecosystem. And like I mentioned, all the stakeholders involved. So starting from the founder who is, creating a disruptive innovation, to the investor who's coming to invest, to the user who's going to be using that product, to the regulator, right? We're just trying to create, the bill is just trying to create an enabling environment that allows everyone to thrive, right? Without having to, clash at some point.
The bill is now in the process of being looked at, and you all are over the moon about that. But how do you think that government can actually create an enabling environment for these startups to thrive?
Okay. So the startup bill is based on different pillars, and these pillars were formed after extensive consultation, extensive needs assessment done with all stakeholders involved, asking the question that you just asked: how can the government create an enabling environment, right? And so these pillars, first was, we need to have concise regulations. We need to know them, so that, because if you do not know a law, then it's easy for you to break it. We need to be able to know what are the things that we're supposed to do, or what are the rules that guide you in a particular ecosystem. Then we're talking about capacity building. We have a dearth of talent. So we need to be able to create a system or an ecosystem that allows for upskilling and training, right, in such a way that we have a larger percentage of young people that are prepared for the jobs of now. And the jobs of now are the digital jobs. You know how we used to talk about the future of jobs being then? No, the future of jobs has finally come, and tech is leading the pack, right? And so it's important for us to create an economy or a system that allows that our young people or people who are currently working in different sectors upskill themselves to be able to meet the global best practices. We're also talking about funding. So startups most typically will be looking for funding, initial funding, seed funding, to be able to, help support them solve these particular problems. And, entrepreneurs are very different people. Entrepreneurs are constantly looking for a way to solve problems, and some of the largest problems, in the world and in Africa and in Nigeria, as the case may be. So funding is key, talent is key. And then, I think the fourth one, I can't remember the fourth one, but I think that we have done a lot of work that has allowed us to properly map out the exact ways that the government can, help create a thriving ecosystem and enabling environment for tech-enabled startups. And that has been sort of looked at and captured in the bill.
Well, Paul, one of the natural questions there, if this is so open to so many people, right? There are many, many Nigerians who use technology. And there are countless adverts of people on various social media platforms make money from WhatsApp, make money from Instagram, and all those things.
From working at home.
Yes. So I'm wondering, do you think this bill captures those as well?
Okay, that's an interesting question, because in the ambit of most laws that the government has created, it usually captures registered businesses in the country. So we have CAMA, the Finance Act. So for you to gain any of the incentives in the business, or let's say a tax break or something, you usually have to be registered. But what you'd find is most of these guys, they just woke up one morning and say, oh, I have this idea, let's start something. And they start. And to be fair, a lot of people have been harmed by such platforms. They say grow your 1,000 naira to 10,000 naira in 5 days. Oh. So how this law should, I think it should, since it's part of the digital economy, but I'm not sure it directly addresses those guys in this current state. But I think that one thing that makes the startup bill really, really interesting, it creates an ambit for building on each layer. So there's a particular layer it's starting with, but there's room for you to just keep adding stuff. So I guess that's why the government is particularly interested in regulating how people use social media, the code of practice and all of that, content moderation. In an ideal scenario, they should actually cover those kind of platforms. But for a startup bill, which is something that is directed at businesses that are focused on high growth, that are focused on solving a problem with a unique business model, and problems that are often overlooked, this is what it directly addresses. But for a lot of people on social media, say we have Instagram vendors and all of that, I think it should, but currently it's, from what I can see, it's going to improve from there.
It sounds to me like one of those landmines that people need to be careful to avoid, right? So are there other areas of this law, other aspects of this law, this proposition, this bill, that government needs to give a little more attention to and people should not ignore? Because it's so easy. I mean, come on, it's a law. Who wants to read? Generally, people don't like to read, and that's probably where some of these vulnerabilities show up. So what are some of the things that you think people need to be aware of before this bill becomes a law? Issues that need to be raised. You've raised some, and gladdens my heart that Ms. Okoro has attended to them. So what are some of these things that you think people need to be aware of just before the bill is passed into law, so that they can be careful, and if they need to be discussed now, discussed?
Okay, so for the current startup bill, what I think should stand out to most people, let's start from the positive side. If you're a young person and you're aspiring to start a business, I think you should actually understand what the startup bill entails and how it can benefit you. So if you're struggling to look for funds to start up your business, the provisions of this bill should actually direct you or point you in the right direction. Say you want to raise money, you want to learn from mentors, people who have done this business before you. Those are some of the positive provisions of the startup bill, right? Then something we need to look out for, which is the concerns about data protection. We use a lot of these social media platforms, and not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but the amount of data these guys have on us is really, they know where you are, they know where you visited. So if you're using a fintech platform, for example, how this fintech handles your data, let's say you're using a Kuda Bank or a PiggyVest. So you should be able to know that, okay, your money is safe, and they're not selling your data to third-party advertisers. Or we've seen recently with some Nigerian government websites or platforms where they publish people's data on the platform, and the data gets to some certain corners of the internet that it shouldn't get to. So those are some of the interesting things I think we should watch out for. But generally, the startup bill itself, the most important thing is you should know that this is what you are entitled to as a small business owner, as a young founder. Okay. And you should be able to leverage it. Then you should be able to notice those gray areas concerning data, those gray areas concerning implementation. You should know that, okay, this law, how does it affect my business? Okay. And how does it affect the other laws that have come up before now?
Let me ask you quickly, since it's a startup bill, startup means that you originate something. Does the law have any protection for your copyright? Is there any way in which, if I start it, it's mine, and whatever is going to be built on it, I still maintain my ownership, copyright, so to speak?
Yeah, so those are some of the interesting points, right? Copyright, patent, those are things that most Nigerian startup founders don't even take seriously, most of the time. So yeah, that is an interesting point, and I don't think it's one of the more finely developed aspects of the startup bill currently, but we already have the Copyright Act in Nigeria, and that needs to be updated. But what the startup bill is doing is it needs to harmonize all of these laws and bring it together in one place. And it's a developing process that doesn't end.
Okay. Tracy, let me take you somewhere entirely different. A startup will qualify as a small or medium-scale enterprise. Am I correct? Am I right?
Well, yes. Well, in some places, yes, that would suffice for. But in other terms, like in the tech ecosystem, we call startups disruptors. So people who have created innovative products and services that have sort of disrupted the market. So, for example, if I were to mention a startup, I would say maybe Flutterwave, right? Maybe Paystack. But in the basic term for the NSB, it just means like a small business that is currently leveraging technology.
Is a policy or a guideline from government that banks should devote X percentage of their profits to small and medium-scale enterprises. So would you be accessing those funds? Do you qualify to access those funds?
as a startup? Is that what you're asking?
Would you qualify as a small or medium scale enterprise so that you can access those funds which government has asked commercial banks to set aside?
I'm trying to understand. Are you asking if I or if a startup would qualify?
Not personally, startups.
Okay. Well, under the Nigerian startup bill, there are processes and procedures that would allow startups to be able to access, funding. And these are the things that would happen during implementation. And I'm happy that you led us into this. So the Senate has passed it. We're waiting for concurrence. But while we're doing that, we have the state adoption in full force. Because my NSB lead would say that when you listen to big companies, they speak about how their companies started in their garage, right? But here in Nigeria, we really don't have garages. What we have are our local communities and our states, and that's where these startups will come from. That's where they will originate from. And so it's important that every state has a bill, right, that also interprets or sort of seeks to take away from the gains of the Nigerian startup bill, which from a federal level, incorporating the nuances and the context of the state, aligning it with the vision of the state towards, entrepreneurship and economic sustainability, and build an environment where startups feel free from anywhere in the country, from anywhere in Africa, they can build and be supported. So, like I said, there are 4 pillars, and we're talking about, infrastructure, there's funding, there's talent and capital development, right? And then there's regulation. So under infrastructure and under capital, and during implementation, there will be specific programs that will be put aside where startups can either now apply and they get accelerated or incubated, so they learn, they're upskilled, and then they can access funding.
Well, we don't have garages, but we have rooms. Those guys who had to start with garages had to use big equipment. Now, you can just start in your room with this. So yes, we still have garages in our homes. Thank you so much, Tracy Okoro, who is founder of Business Academy Africa, as well as State Adoption and Integration Lead for the NSB. Thank you so much for your time, as well as Emmanuel Paul, who is Managing Editor, TechPoint.
Thank you very much.
Truly appreciate you being here.